as a child, we lived next door to one another, and I grew up on the stories that he told me of his time in the military. And man, did I revere that person. He was a hero to me. He was my idol. He was everything I wanted to be. And here I was at like a really low point in my life, not knowing what to do. And I'm thinking, maybe I should join the military.
Welcome to the In the Arena podcast. My name is Jared Miguez, a co-host on this podcast that brings you the inspiring stories of our clients who are leaders and innovators across different industries in Southeast Louisiana. They are visionary entrepreneurs, savvy real estate professionals, media creators, military business owners, and community champions. And we are going to showcase the remarkable achievements and share their personal stories. Tune in for insightful conversations, valuable lessons, and motivational stories that are going to reveal their secrets to success and offer you insights to help you on your own path. Welcome to In the Arena podcast.
Let's kick this off, dude. Welcome back to the Pipeline Podcast. I'm Dominic Luke, my co-host here, good-looking co-host, Jared Miguez. And we're excited to have Izzy Fried on today. Izzy is a friend of mine. I've known him for a couple years now. He was living up in New York. He now just moved to Texas. He's got a pretty interesting story. He has a really cool business that he has right now, and so I'm excited to have him on to talk about that. So let's just get right into it. So before we start, Izzy, introduce yourself, first and last name, the branch in the military that you were in, and then we'll dive right into it.
Sure. First and foremost, thank you guys for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this podcast and to be able to share stories with you and just talk to you about the conversation we're about to have. My name is Izzy Fried. I was a volunteer in the Israeli Defense Force. I was attached to the Airborne Unit, I guess, which would be the equivalent of Army Rangers here in the United States.
Cool. And then Israeli Army, right?
Yes, sir.
How did that happen? Tell us about that.
All right, so it's a little bit of a crazy story. I was probably a little bit of a rambunctious kid, and as I got older, my parents obviously got older as well, and sort of went through life changes. My dad went through a period of time where he lost his job and things were pretty difficult for him. And as a result of that, things were difficult at home. And I was I have an older sister who's developmentally disabled. Essentially, that made me the oldest in terms of reliability and the impact that sort of the life events that were affecting my dad had on the family would essentially roll down onto me. So there was a lot of friction at home that caused me to act out. And I got a job in the summer. I was a lifeguard. I made a real nice amount of money for a 17-year-old kid. And things at home just got to a head. And, at some point, I remember my dad saying to me, democracy ends at our front doorstep. The rules are the rules, them's are the rules. And if you don't like it, get out. And I took that literally, and I packed my bags and I bought a one-way ticket to Israel. I had never been out of the country. Niagara Falls was about as far as international as I've ever gotten before. So for me to pack my bags and leave was a big deal in and of itself. My aunt and cousin were going to visit friends of theirs in Israel for the summer. And I essentially tagged along with them. No plan. I didn't know anybody in country. I didn't speak the language. I knew nothing. I essentially figured I was going to go, just tag along with them, go tour, see what the country was all about, and then figure out life thereafter. Well, the summer ended. They left, and I was left to my own devices. I ran out of money. Got odds and ends jobs. I worked as a waiter. Now, 30 years ago, we weren't using plastic utensils. We were using real china. And I was 120 pounds, sopping wet. So I couldn't lift a tray with the dishes from everybody sitting at a table. The first time I attempted to do that, it fell. and all the dishes broke. And of course, the manager came over and said, "That's coming out of your paycheck." So that wasn't a good job for me. I bartended a little bit at the Pirates Pub in Tiberias, and I had nowhere to live. So I was bouncing around from place to place. I was living on the street for a short while, and I grew up on the stories of my grandfather. He fought in World War II. His siblings were all killed in the concentration camp in the Holocaust. He managed to escape and he joined the British Army. So as a child, we lived next door to one another, and I grew up on the stories that he told me of his time in the military. And man, did I revere that person. He was a hero to me. He was my idol. He was everything I wanted to be. And here I was at like a really low point in my life, not knowing what to do. And I'm thinking, maybe I should join the military. Maybe that would make him proud. So I went to the recruiter's office in Jerusalem, and I walked by the front of the office and I didn't go in. And I did that for a day, 2 days, 3 days. And then a recruiter came outside. His name was Yuval Malamed. I'll never forget these names. And he saw what, I probably looked like a stray puppy. And he pulled me inside. He gave me coffee. It was nasty weather. It was probably, I want to say it was September time. So in the summer, it's just endless sun and heat. There's no rain in the Middle East in the summertime. September starts the rainy season, and it gets miserable. It's cold, it's wet, and if you got no place to go, you're just cold and wet.
Yeah.
He brought me inside. He gave me a hot drink. Started talking to me about the military, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. So I left. And it took me 2 weeks of walking back and forth and going in and out and speaking to you, Fal, before I was able to sign the papers and be like, all right, I got no money, got no place to go. I'll get 3 squares a day. I'll get a roof over my head. I'll get out of this miserable rain. So I'll do it. And that's what I did. That's how I joined the IDF.
So what year was that?
Oh my gosh, that was probably 1992.
Okay. 17, 18 years old. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you join the Israeli army, you go in through and I'm sure their military setup similar. You go through boot camp, you get indoctrinated into the military life.
Yes.
Right. And how long did you serve?
A little less than 3 years.
Okay. So for 3 years, you were in active duty in the Israeli army. What was your role? What were some of the things that you had to experience?
Okay, so we'll back up. You were talking about boot camp and whatnot. So mind you, I've never been in the French Foreign Legion, but let's use that for an example only because it's open to all nationalities, right? I was not an Israeli citizen, wasn't born in country, didn't speak the language. So here I am signing up for a military force that I'm not native to, and I don't speak their language. And while I'm Jewish, culturally, growing up in America, it's dramatically and drastically different than growing up in Israel. So I'm coming in, and as a volunteer, I will say at the outset, you're mocked. I was mocked because I was looked at as, we were talking when we set up this Zoom call. I got this background going on. And you're like, are you a penthouse guy? Mm-hmm. That's how you're perceived when you get to Israel. You're the penthouse guy. You're like the privileged American. In Israel, it's mandated service. So from the time that you're 18 to you're 21, at least back then, everybody was mandated to go to service with certain exceptions. So here you are, the so-called privileged American coming to Israel, asking to join up, and they're looking at you like, you're white on rice, you're weak-minded and privileged, and like you shouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. So there was incessant hazing. I was tasked with cleaning the bathroom quite often, and cleaning the kitchen and cleaning gear. But having grown up and had the benefits of the stories of my grandfather, I embraced it. Like I didn't cry over it. I did not. I'm like, it's a job. They're asking me to do it. There's value here, so I'm going to do it. So I started at the bottom, but because I didn't complain and because I did the tasks that were given to me, and I approached those tasks as if it was, the most monumental task, as if it was a mission planning session. It didn't make a difference to me. Eventually, the sergeant took notice. Eventually, the ranking officers saw that, because weekends you had off and weekends you can leave base. It wasn't like here you had time off, and in your time off you can leave the base. I didn't. I stayed on base. I had nowhere to go. So they took notice, and slowly but surely they allowed me and exposed me to the paratrooper unit, which is the Tzanchanim, and I was slowly indoctrinated into a paratrooper unit as a lone soldier, as an outsider, which was a great privilege for me.
Wow. That's interesting how I just find it so interesting that here's this American kid just going over to Israel and has nothing, essentially what you're saying, nothing really going for you. And you said, I'm joining the military, and then I'm going to go and become part of this unit in the Israeli Defense Force, right? What was that like for you on your end, knowing that you left all of your family home, you had all of your stuff happening back home, right? But you went and to a totally different country that you're not from, joined the military, and are now part of this other mission.
So, to be fair and honest, it was scary as shit. It was scary as shit. You have nobody to talk. I had nobody to talk to. I had nobody to bounce ideas off of. I had no support system in place. I had none of that. I was literally, you're sort of fumbling in the dark a little bit. But I will say this: my survival and success for me then and for me today has been consistent in that I tuned it all out. I don't know how. I don't know why. I mean, why would be survival, but I just tuned out the noise. Like I put on blinders like a horse in Central Park. I only saw what was directly in front of me. I had zero peripheral vision when it came to life. All right. So whatever was in front of me, the task at hand, the mission, what I had to do to get through my day, that was my exclusive focus. So I had no contact with people back home. I was not speaking with my family at the time. So I didn't have that noise. I didn't have that chatter. I didn't have that as a distraction. I knew nobody there. So I didn't have that as a distraction. It wasn't like there was this, a party is going to happen on Monday, and I have this like nagging feeling in the back of my head, or a distraction. I need to go get my tasks done so I can go party. I had nothing going on. So all I had was the military. All I had was what was directly in front of me. And that allowed me to focus with like laser precision focus on that, to the exclusion of everything else.
That's so interesting because, myself and some other guests that we have had on who have gone through, selection courses and that sort of thing. I can just speak for myself. One of my pillars, one of the things that I had going for me was I had a support system. I had these people on my corner saying, you got it, keep moving forward. You didn't. And yet you were still able to go and do, incredibly hard things, go to a whole new country and join another country's military. That still blows my mind that you went to a whole nother country, joined their military, all just on you. There's no support whatsoever, right? And so there's a lot of learning there for people to hear some of the value that you have on, like, if you don't have a support team, what you're saying is you don't need it either sometimes. Like, all you had was yourself. You had nothing else going for you except that, right? And so could you talk about that piece in the fact of, like, what did you learn from that experience, and how did you bring that into once you moved back home and you started going to law school, and we'll get into all of that. How did you take that and what was the big thing that you learned from that experience in itself?
Okay, so that's from my perspective, a complicated compound question that has a pretty deep, and a pretty deep answer from me looking at it from my perspective. I think, as an outsider looking in, like talking to now and hearing sort of like the amazement, right? Oh my God, wow, that's like amazing. I had a support system. You didn't have a support system. I mean, to be fair, I had a support system. The support system was the military, it was the people in front of me, the people on either side of me, the people guiding me, commanding me, ordering me to do things. It may not sound like a support system. It was, because without them, I'd have no direction. If I was left to my own devices, I would have been on the street, and I don't know where I'd be today. Honestly, I have no idea. The pro to that is, for the mission, for the task at hand, shutting out that noise and having that laser precision focused allowed me to be successful in the military, because what that ended up doing was separating and differentiating myself from everybody else. People had to be there. They knew they had to be there. I didn't have to be there. I chose to be there. So initially I was hazed for it, but eventually I was embraced and lauded for it. I was elevated as a result of that, because they're like, holy shit, you don't need to be here. You're not just here. You're here putting in the work, and you're staying extra, and you're doing more than you have to do. And that got me in the good graces of people. Now, for a 17-year-old person who's super influenced by their surroundings, I didn't have video games. I didn't have all this stuff. All I had were people that I looked up to around me, surrounding me, people that I was like, oh man, if only I could be like them, right? Imagine you're a cook in the Navy and you're surrounded by Navy SEALs all day, right? Or in the Air Force and you're surrounded by PJs, and you're just like, I wish I could be that, right? That's these guys are the tip of the spear. It's the pinnacle of the military, and where I'm immersed in right now. It allowed me to get close to these people. It allowed me to get incorporated into what they were doing, and to be trusted and brought in and taught and trained, which is incredible, right? And what that did moving forward was allowing me to be task focused, right? So be it law school, be it business, be it anything thereafter, if I focused on the task at hand to the exclusion of everything else, invariably it would bring me a level of success. How successful, would be circumstantial, right? Related to the circumstance and the incident. But the negative component to that is, that's good if you're operating independently, if you're operating in a bubble, or you're operating in the military. When you get to the real world and you start a family and you have other people in your inner circle, that can be a big detractor from the other aspects of life. So, the pros and the cons and the benefits and sort of the negatives is trying to find that balance. And for the longest time, I would say probably until I hit 40 or 40 plus years old, I was that type A alpha personality guy who was always mission oriented, mission focused, to the exclusion of everything else. I would say that I was a good dad and a good husband, but the forefront of my mind was, what made me in my head a good dad and husband was working, was focusing on the job and being the best at it that I could possibly be. And I don't think, I think for a long time, I didn't have I was still walking around with those blinders, essentially, right? And it took till I had reached a certain level of maturity for me to start peeling them back or bending them back. I don't say that I necessarily ripped them off, but I had to broaden my peripheral vision and engage it, which I was unable to do for a long time, because I was so trained and so regimented and so fixated that I couldn't do it. And family lost out, and other, my interpersonal relationships and skills, I would say, suffered as a result of it. And I didn't even know it at the time, because, being successful in business and being successful in work and being successful in my job, for me, meant that I was doing right by everybody in my inner circle, and having the ability to moderate that, balance that, and maybe even shut it off at times. I had no awareness of that until much later in life.
So what in your life helps you realize that transition, or that awareness?
Getting divorced, having children that don't talk to you, I think also a certain level of maturity, meaning you have to do a lot of introspection. And I was extroverted. I mean, I was probably introverted too, but I was always looking outward, always looking outward. Okay, image, success was an appearance, um, and I think that there was a certain amount of vanity too, because with success, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really good at this, and I think to be successful, there has to be a certain. I mean, you're an attorney. I'm an attorney,
Yeah.
right? So I'm a litigator. It's performance art. It's like getting up in front of people. It's razzle dazzle. You're manipulative. You're trying to convince complete strangers that everything you tell them they should pick up. Right? It takes a certain amount of audacity to do that. I relished in that. I love it to this day. I love it to this day. Give me a platform here. Say, Izzy, you want to come on a podcast? Yeah, hell yeah, I want to come on a podcast. But today, I'm introspective first. I'm reflective first. I'd like to think that I am, certainly more so than I was before. So what was the transition? Like, how did that happen? I think for me, I had to lose a lot, right? I had accomplished a tremendous amount of accomplishments and success. I found a tremendous amount of success. And then I hit a wall. I'm like, what can I accomplish now? I sort of checked all these boxes that I had mentally set for myself. And, was that the end of the road for me? Like, what happens? What's the next step for me? And when I couldn't answer that question, or what I was doing no longer had the luster and the appeal that it had until that moment, I started to get depressed. I started to slow down. The wheel started to slow down, and I think once the pace of life for me slowed down, and I was able to, like, the world sort of caught up and then moved ahead of me, and I was like, whoa, all this was behind me all this time. Or you get to turn around, maybe look in the rearview mirror, whatever the metaphor is. The minute you stop and hit a hard pause is the minute you can start taking stock in where you are. And I wasn't able to do that. I was always moving a million miles a minute.
Yeah.
Do you think that though stems from how that's basically your childhood though. That's what you were doing until you left to go to Israel. And then once you got to Israel, you were constantly moving. You didn't have a place to stay. You had to find jobs here. You had to do this. You had to do that. And so it's almost like a learned pattern that you developed for yourself, a learned habit, a deep groove, whatever you want to call it, that you developed for yourself to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's so funny, because look, I've immersed myself in therapy and jujitsu and psychedelics and all this stuff, and it's been an incredibly amazing journey. That could be a whole other podcast, but it creates an epiphany for me now, having this conversation with you, is that I was always trying to stay ahead of tragedy or problems or whatever it was that I was afraid of that was going to catch me. So that's probably why I was moving at the speed of light. And the minute I stopped, and like all that caught up, and like that weight pushes you forward, you're like, and you're still here. You're like, wait a second. Okay, I don't have to run. I can actually like breathe and take a minute, and it's heavy, but we can work through this. That took a lot of work, man. That was.
Well, so let me ask you this. So, like you said, we both being lawyers, both went through that law school experience, both passed the bar exam. I wasn't in the military, but I say that the way that I was trained, or at least the way that I interpreted law school, was how much energy and effort and focus can I have on this task of passing or finishing law school and passing the bar exam. And like, that was in my life, the part that like really taught me how to focus and work really hard. And I don't know if I didn't have to work as hard as I did in order to get through law school and pass the bar, but I chose to put in that type of effort and energy. And now it has translated into anything that I do now. And people say that I'm anxious, or not anxious, but over, like I'm hyper focused, or I work really hard and I put everything I have into anything I do. I learned that in law school. Can't imagine what would happen if I did the military first. But did your military experience help you with that mindset you had, being able to hyper focus on your school when you got into law school?
Absolutely. It's sort of taking a snapshot of that and then replicating it in law school. It was the same. It was the same rodeo, if you will, right? So like I had no problem hitting the books. Yeah. In fact, I'll take it a step further. You know, I can't speak for other people, and there maybe you can talk about this, but study groups, right? I started doing a study group with some cats from school. Ultimately, I just broke off and did my own thing, and I was
100%.
much more successful doing my
100%.
thing than sitting in a group. When I studied for the bar exam, I showed up to the bar exam with a deep tan because I was at my buddy's house sitting on his rooftop. We'd go to like bar review courses in the morning. We had the afternoons and evenings off, and he lived down the block from the law school, and we just climbed up on his roof, took out our books, went to work, got lunch, and people thought I was on vacation. I
Yeah.
wasn't, but knock on wood, I was able to pass the bar exam at the first try.
Yeah. Where'd you go to law school?
Brooklyn Law School, Brooklyn, New York.
All right, so let's keep moving down our timeline here. Israeli Defense Force got out, moved back to the States, decided to go to law school, practice, pass your bar exam, go to law school, pass the bar exam, move into becoming a litigator, right? And started your own law firm, successful law firm in New York for however many years, right? And so you had, as this podcast is called, the Pipeline Podcast, right? You had your military pipeline that you went to from 17 to Israel. That was part of your pipeline. Then you went through law school and went into that pipeline. And then, you started, working as a lawyer and then moved into business, right? And so let's quickly touch on some of the lessons that you learned learned in your law school, learned once you became a lawyer. Some of the lessons that you experienced firsthand that you still use to this day, right? Some of those things that you were like, oh, this happened when I was 17 years old and I still fucking learned from it today, and I'm still using this lesson learned here in this moment for my now new business, right? So let's just briefly touch on some of the maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 top lessons learned from you that you are still staying true to today.
No particular order. I would say your name is your reputation. Being able to take orders, right? Making sure the mission gets done. It's not about right or wrong. And there's caveats to that. Obviously, I'm not making a blanket statement. Obviously, you want to be in the right. In this day and age, we got to be careful about what we say. But name's your reputation, right? I'm not going to regurgitate what I said about the military, but essentially me putting the time in developed a reputation for me that was attached to my name. And then my name started to get around. And as my name got passed around, it allowed me access to things that I would never have access to outside of that. Transition now, law school, and my first job was a state prosecutor with the state prosecutor's office in Brooklyn, New York. My first boss was fantastic supervisor. He said, your name is your reputation. Your name goes on every file you touch, on every file folder that gets assigned to you. Your name will go on that. That folder is going to have a life of its own. It's not going to stay with you. It starts with somebody else. It's going to move to you, and then it may move somewhere else. Your name's always going to be on that folder. It's going to be on every piece of paper in that folder. Make sure that wherever that folder ends up with your name, that whoever looks in that folder only has good things to associate with you and your name, because they're not going to know you. They're not going to speak to you, but what you do and how you handle your case will travel with that case. So, I think that having that awareness, like if you know that nobody's going to see what you do and your work product, we can cheat on ourselves. right? It's harder to cheat on yourself if you know somebody else is looking and watching constantly. If Big Brother's always got eyes on you, or your work is going to be scrutinized and evaluated, you're going to want to put extra time and effort into that, right? Because I can compromise on myself from today till tomorrow, but I don't want to compromise if I think I'm going to let somebody else down. And then getting the job done, right? I feel like a lot of times we get lost in the weeds, or you can get lost in the weeds. My way was better. You should have told me, I wish I would have known, and all true. In a perfect world, all that would be great. We don't live in a perfect world. For us, it's about, and in the military, it's certainly imperfect, but getting the mission done is tantamount, right? Unfortunately, people get injured, killed, maimed, but the mission is the mission, right? Everybody involved in that assignment, in that mission, is putting in 210%, knowing full well that there's risks associated with it, and a lot of people unfortunately suffer the consequences of those risks, for the rest of their lives, or don't, or perish, right? We can get hung up on that and say, look, I don't want to end up like that. I can't do the next mission, or I want to sit this one out. I mean, nobody would blame you for that. I think it's human nature, but having an awareness of that, and saying, look, we have to get the job done. Let's take ego out of it. Let's take the problems out of it, or let's come together and problem solve so that we can get the mission done. We can always do an after action report. We can always come afterwards and sit down and figure out best practices. Did it go off without a hitch? Were there issues along the way? Where were the hiccups? How can we improve? I love that. But I don't want it to happen at the expense of getting the task accomplished, or the mission done. We all come from diverse backgrounds. We all have differences of opinions. We all have different personalities. I welcome them all. Let's go. It makes for robust discussion, and it allows you to see things from perspectives beyond your own.
Well, that also go ahead. I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to say, it kind of segues us right into what it is that you're doing now, because, your name is everything. The job has to get done, and the hard work that you're putting into it is what is growing your current project of Fox 2 Sierra, right? And so I want to take some time before we run out of time to really promote that and to talk about that, because the lessons that you learned and the way that you were growing up from a child, going to Israel, joining the IDF, going to law school, all of the way that you operated yourself and operated you as a person led you right into what it is right now as the CEO of Fox 2 Sierra, right? And you're now trying to solve a much bigger problem, right? A much bigger problem of child safety in schools, and ensuring that our schools are protected, our children are protected with the board that you invented. So let's take a little time to talk about what Fox 2 Sierra is, this business, and what it is that you invented, and what it is that you're bringing to the school system, and for safety reasons.
Okay. So thank you for that introduction, and for the opportunity to talk about it as well, and most importantly, to be a part of it. Fox 2 Sierra is I'll say, a full service security consulting company. It was created on a whim, honestly. It was designed and developed in my head as a concept during COVID, because as a litigator, COVID shut down the country, litigation ground to a halt. I needed something to do. Idle hands do the devil's work. I wasn't going to sit home and twiddle my thumbs. And I immersed myself in the federal grant space. What that essentially means is there are Homeland Security grants that fund houses of worship, nonprofit organizations, to combat active threats, be it terroristic, active shooter, and the like. And while I was sitting home, I connected with a house of worship near my home. I was delivering meals for the elderly and infirm, because nobody was going out when COVID started. Lord, they thought if you stepped outside, you dropped dead. So I was just doing community service, essentially, just to pass the time. And no different than the military. It sort of got me noticed. It's like, who's this guy that's going around delivering meals to people? Why are you doing this? What's your story? You give them a little teaser, a little background, and the next thing you know, they're like, oh, IDF, this prosecutor, can you help us with our security grant? We have a security grant, or we're trying to get a security grant, and we're trying to beef up security at the synagogue. And I was quickly enamored, and I went down the rabbit hole, as I do with things I get my hooks into. So F2S was designed initially as a training company. I saw gaps in where synagogues, houses of worship, schools that were making use of these federal grants, they were rushing right away to up armor buildings and do target hardening. And I did all this background research about what those funds actually cover. And I saw training, and I was like, okay, I mean, it's great to have all this equipment, but if you don't know how to utilize it, if you don't know how to take advantage of it, if you don't realize its capabilities or lack thereof, it's essentially, it'll help to a certain point, but I think there's no substitute for training. Certainly, I saw the value in it for me personally with everything that I had done in my background. And I started putting feelers out to gauge interest in tapping into the grant to pay for active shooter training. So tactical combat casualty care, emergency action plans, putting security teams together, and incident command, that sort of thing. Well, wouldn't you know it? It was exciting to me and nobody else. Literally, I couldn't pay people to get interested in training because everybody's got a day job, everybody's got families, everybody's got a million and one priorities, and they're not interested. But that didn't stop me. Without getting too much into the weeds, I was able to connect with one of my partners, former Navy SEAL from development group, and planted the seed in his head, and he was all gung-ho about it, loved the idea, said, let's open a company, let's do this. And I went, and his name is Chris Fettis, and Dominic, so his last name is Fettis, my last name is Fried. I said, all right, we got 2 Fs, we'll call it, Fried Fettis Securities or Fried Fettis Systems or whatever the case may be. I'm like, all right, 2 Fs and an S. I'm like, F2S. I went online. I couldn't buy the domain name for F2S. I'm like, Chris, I can't buy the domain name. He's like, why don't we do Military Foxtrot 2 Sierra? That was taken. But Fox 2 Sierra was available. So I bought it, and hence the company was born. It was called Fox 2 Sierra. But Chris was busy at the time, working as a contractor for other companies. And I went online, and I was, looking for talent essentially, and trying to gauge interest. And Dominic, that's how you and I met. We met on a whim. Honestly, it was the most random thing ever. I'll never forget. You're like, yeah, let's get on a call, and that call for me was magical. And I'll say this. When I had my doubts, you were a believer, man. You were like, you always say, onwards and upwards, man. So, this is going to happen. You were just like, this is going to happen. It's going to happen. And as you know, nothing happens when you think it's going to happen, right? We can plant seeds, and we can cultivate, and we can nurture, and we put the time and the effort in. And I would say the germination period I like to say from contact to contract, it could be 12 months. It could be 9 months. It could be 12 months. It could be 18 months. You got to stay the course, man. You got to have fortitude. You got to have grit. That's another ode to Dominic. So Fox 2 Sierra started, and Dominic did our first training. We did a ECCC, a Tactical Combat Casualty Care Incident Command 2-day training for 8 security team members of the synagogue that I connected myself with during COVID. And honestly, that was our proof of concept. day one, I had bought breakfast for everybody just to entice them to come. And day two, I think we like doubled in size. People brought their spouses, people brought their kids. They were so enamored and so blown away, both by the training and the quality of instructor. You know,
You were there?
I was the instructor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to, he hired me. I came up to New York and I built out an emergency action plan for their synagogue. And for 2 days, we spent the whole time training on medical skills and then training on, okay, let's put this into practicality. And we went through the synagogue and we did all these really cool things. And that's how him and I got connected. And now I'm the medical director for F2S. And we put together consulting packages for a number of different places, schools, synagogues, that sort of thing.
Very cool.
Building out an emergency action plan for that specific client.
Very cool.
Yeah.
insanely cool, because that honestly, that was proof of concept. If that didn't happen, I don't know that F2S would have taken off, because I had nothing else going on at the time. And the fact that you were willing to roll the dice, and the fact that you heard the concept and said, you were only encouraging. There was not one negative. You asked your questions. You put a program together. We ran it up the flagpole. It was accepted, and we executed. And that was wild. It was wild that even happened. And since then, so here's sort of the amazing thing. If you're doing good things, at least for me, if you're doing good things, if you're doing the right thing, then the growth is organic.
Yeah.
All right. Where we are today in 2024, so it's 2 years later, right? We have built out this incredible cadre of like tier one awesome dudes from all backgrounds, from all disciplines, from all branches of the military, each one an expert in their own right, in their own field. And each one brings to the table something that somebody else doesn't bring to the table necessarily, right? We're not a one-trick pony. And here's the other thing. For me personally, I think that my background, my life experience, and now being able to take those blinders off makes me, I hope, a humbler, more receptive, more open individual than I ever was during all those previous years, so that I look at everything now as opportunity. For me, anything and everything is an opportunity until and unless it becomes not an opportunity. But I go into it open.
Yeah.
And what we've collectively built together, this is not me anymore. This is us collectively. What we've been able to build in the last 2 years is freaking crazy. It's crazy that we are cultivating relationships now with the federal government, larger organizations, multi-state, clientele and interest, all born out of training. But you mentioned the products and what I designed. If it didn't start with the training, I don't think I ever would have gotten to products, because again, having proof of concept, you need that momentum. You need something to fuel the fire. You need some, coal to shovel into that furnace. And that training was it for me. Shortly after our training, Uvalde happened. The Robb Elementary School happened in Uvalde, Texas. And, now that I was immersing myself in this space, I had an awareness, a consciousness of active shooter scenarios and what was going on in our country and the escalating nature of these events. When I saw Uvalde happen and I saw the officers in the hallway with that ballistic shield, and kids were still alive and unfortunately perished, through the inaction of first responders, without going, into, that response, what it did for me, at least, was say to myself, I have twins. If God forbid my twins were in a school where an event like that kicked off, if I raced like a bat out of hell, it would take me 20 minutes to get to my children's school. And I'm ready to go, all the gear and all that stuff. by the time I get there, the event's over, right? Statistically speaking. What can I do to help my own children in an event like that to help buy them time? Like, can I give them the same ballistic shield that the law enforcement had that they seemed like they didn't deploy in that event? And that's where the seed was planted in my head. I'm going to design something that gives my kids ballistic defense capabilities for nothing else, to buy them time until law enforcement or cavalry can arrive. And
Yeah.
I went onto Amazon and I bought a mobile dry erase board, a whiteboard. I got shipped to my house. I took the whole thing apart. I saw all the components, and then I called a buddy of mine up who had a welding shop, and I was, I had also during COVID taught myself a little bit of welding. By no means am I a welder, but amateur hour, 1000%. So I went into the shop and I used scraps off the floor. I bought a whiteboard. I contacted a ballistic company. I ordered some ballistic parts. And I built a prototype. Oh, it was before our training, because at our training, I had the demo.
Yeah.
You needed a whiteboard.
Yeah.
So I brought the first iteration prototype 001 to our training, and the whiteboard was held on with painter's tape.
Yep.
Yeah. So nobody knew what that was. I didn't tell anybody what it was, but during a break at your training, I rolled it to one side of this auditorium that we were in, and I had the whole class get behind the board. So like 10 people behind there, 10 adults. And I took a video of them walking it across the floor. And then I had them stop, and I made them come out from opposite sides of the board. And there were 10 people, only like 6 stuck their head out because some of the women didn't want to go on camera. But holy cow, we were able to get 10 adults behind that board, completely concealed behind cover, because it is bulletproof. And they were able to walk 50 to 75 feet undetected. Like, I couldn't see them. And the video speaks for itself. That again was proof of concept. I brought that video and that board to Homeland Security. I presented it to them, and guess what? In a week, they said, "You know what? We love it. We're approving that for funding under the same grant that we utilized to pay for this TCCC and incident command training that Dominic put together." And I'm like, okay, I now have training and I have a product. And the rest is history. That synagogue bought that first board that we
Did they? They bought it?
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So how many schools are using the board, or how many of these have you deployed?
Okay, so to be fair, we've sold less than 10 of them, but they are deployed in New York, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, Chicago, and Texas. So there's boards in 8 states.
So how do we get the name? How do we get the word out about these things? I mean, are y'all doing trainings for elementary schools across the country? Are y'all selling these boards to schools? Like, what's y'all's plan?
So excellent question. The issue with the boards is an interesting one. We have tremendous support. The most success that we've had with funding the board came from grassroots funding, meaning the parent body passed a hat, did a fundraiser, and collected money to put a board in their children's classroom. Schools, in the public school system, schools are on sort of political handcuffs, if you will. They have funding that's allocated from the municipality, the city, the state. Maybe they have access to federal funds as well. But the problem with that is it's very political. So you'll see companies out there that retain lobbyists, and the lobbyists can go get legislation enacted to get products that they produce into schools. But you're talking millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. I call it pay to play, right? We've been organic from the get-go. We're a small company. We've we've gotten our product and our training out there through word of mouth, blood, sweat, and tears, honestly. Social media. And I would say for the first year, I was behind the train, pushing that train, right? And the momentum was all self-generated. 2023, the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024, the train started to move on its own. Finally, momentum started to pick up on its own, and I was able to jump on the caboose and start working my way forward. How do we get it into schools? Pressure. You got to put pressure on the decision makers. The funds are there. I can tell you without a doubt that the funds are there. We have found funds in multiple states, some of which are specifically earmarked for ballistic protection, but due to politics and outside pressure, it could be from I can tell you in New York, we've interacted with a grant management company that is responsible for tens of millions of dollars for a bunch of organizations, and we're not on their vendor list. I tried to get on their vendor list. I can't. They don't want to put me on their vendor list.
We were really close to having some of these boards in St. Tammany.
Really?
We there was money allocated to from a COVID fund that was moved over to give to a specific sheriff department, and the funds got used for something else. So it's a very, I think Izzy and I were both kind of taken back how political this was really going to be to get these boards into schools, when if you think about it, it's a rolling whiteboard with ballistic protection that can mount in front of a door and secure an entire classroom.
Yeah.
Right? But when schools, specifically public schools, get allocated money, they look at things of like, oh, we got all this money, let's put cameras in the school, or let's change the locks on the doors. And so it's been an uphill battle, no doubt. And really, the private schools are somewhat easier because they have their own private funding. Yeah. And so,
well, if just thinking about it from an outside perspective, and this is just obviously thinking off the top of my head, I think if you got the parents behind it,
yeah,
it would be a huge help.
Yeah.
Because if the parents feel like their kids will be more safe with this other than what the schools are doing,
yeah,
they would be interested. I mean, and yeah, like you said, the private school system may be an easier one to do. I would say from our standpoint, knowing how much video can make an impact on your business, just promoting and getting more video of this product so people can see what it does is going to be a huge help. Because I think I want something like this in my kids' schools, knowing that they could be at risk and most vulnerable group of people in our society, and there's hundreds of them at each school with only a few people there to protect them.
Yep.
The more they have to help them out, the better.
Yep.
So that's great. I mean, look. So how can people find out more about the board? I want to make sure in y'all's program, because I want to tell more people about it. So how can we share y'all's message and y'all's stories? Is there a social media page? You have a website?
We have all of the above. We have the website is www.fox, F-O-X, the number 2, Sierra, SIERRA.com. There are links on there to videos with the board, commercials we've made, media, other podcasts. There's our Instagram account, again, is Fox2 Sierra. Check that out. That's really high-end stuff. It's high speed, high-end. It looks, pretty badass, if I do say so myself. And then LinkedIn. So interestingly enough, we're having this conversation. How do we get exposure? I recently just started putting time and effort into LinkedIn, which is, we thought going straight to consumer would be the shortest path to success. It's not. It's speaking. Well, it is if you can get to the parents. Yes, that's a tall order. That would take a tremendous amount of effort in the day-to-day if I would be on the phone with parents all day long. But LinkedIn goes to policymakers, goes to people in the space, in the industry. And I would say in the last 3 weeks, I have been doing daily posts and taken the engagement from 0 to 20,000 engagements. 22,000 engagements in 3 weeks. So people are listening and they're engaging. And now that's gotten me the most reception to date of people in the position to do something with the boards or the training. And let me be clear, it's not only about the boards, it's the package, it's everything.
Yeah.
I want to also be very clear about one thing. We don't go out and shit on anybody else. I don't over promote what we do over anything that anybody else has. If you want to have a conversation with me about what I think, would be the most effective security assessment of your particular facility, it's going to be custom to you. There's no one manual that fits every single customer entity. We got to come in, we got to do an assessment, we got to walk through your facility. I got to hear from you what your issues are. I want to address those issues. I can give you my thoughts and my opinions about things, but ultimately synergy is what's going to be successful. I can sell you an AI detection system that you have no idea how it works, and you can put your full faith and confidence in this thing, and somebody can sneak a gun in through a side door, right, and bypass the system. It happened last week. It happened just a few days ago, where 2 kids in 2 different schools got guns through schools with metal detectors and personnel and whatnot. Our board, if I had to focus on the board, it's the only product that I know of, so I'm being cautious in what I'm saying, that goes straight to the students, straight to the teachers. It goes straight to the number 1 target in an active shooter event. So until we stop them, until we're able to keep active shooters outside of schools, while they're still getting inside of schools, I don't care if you're like a preventative person, necessary, essential, very important. I don't care if you're a camera person, necessary, essential, very important. Metal detectors, all that. SROs, yes. Armed, yes. Great. Until we stop them getting in and putting rounds inside a building, I want my kids to have the protection that they need, so that if they can't get out, I can take some degree of safety, a little percentage more, that they have something in their hands that they can hide behind until I can get there, or until somebody qualified can get there. That's the one pitch that I can give you about this product over all other products. And I'm not saying disregard all other products. I'm saying let's work together, use a layered system, a tiered system, in how to approach safety and security. We'll talk about it, and we'll figure out what best practices are, right? There's no be-all, end-all.
There you go. Nailed it.
www.fox2sierra.com. That's
Yep.
how we get in touch with you.
Yep.
Cool. Well, our time is running out, Izzy. We could continue more and more, but maybe we'll just have you on another time and we can continue the conversation. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate you. We appreciate you, sharing your knowledge and your experience and your lessons.
Yeah.
Any parting words?
No, man, I'm excited. I'm gonna reach out to some administrators at my kids' school tomorrow, because I think that, like you said, you can add a couple minutes and seconds to the time for somebody to come save our kids' lives is important.
Yep.
Yeah. And then Fox 2 Sierra, man, Izzy, I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Guys, thank you so much. An honor and a privilege, really. Thank you, humbly.